The sound of breaking glass cut through the smoky haze of the Lucky Star Saloon, and Natalie Harper barely flinched as she stepped over the shards with practiced ease, her crimson skirts sweeping dangerously close to the jagged edges. She had been working in this place for 3 years, and in that time, she had learned to navigate broken bottles, broken furniture, and broken promises with equal grace. The year was 1882, and Chico, California had grown into a bustling railroad town where miners, ranch hands, and drifters came to spend their wages on whiskey and false affection. Natalie moved between the tables with a tray balanced on one hand, her dark hair pinned up beneath a feathered headpiece that she secretly despised. At 23 years old, she had seen enough of saloon life to know it would drain the youth from her face and the dreams from her heart if she let it. "Another round over here, sweetheart." A grizzled prospector waved his empty glass in the air, his beard stained with tobacco juice. Natalie painted on her professional smile and nodded, turning toward the bar where Floyd, the bartender, was already pouring. The piano player in the corner pounded out a tinny rendition of a popular tune, while 2 other saloon girls danced with customers who could barely stand. This was the nightly ritual, the endless cycle that made Natalie feel like she was trapped in amber, preserved but lifeless. She had arrived in Chico with her mother when she was 17, fleeing a situation back east that neither of them spoke about anymore. Her mother had found work as a seamstress, scraping together barely enough to keep them fed and sheltered in a single room above a dry goods store. When her mother fell ill 2 years later, Natalie had taken the only job available to a young woman with no education and no connections. The Lucky Star had welcomed her with open arms and empty promises. The owner, a portly man named Clarence Whitmore, told her she could sing on stage, that she had real talent. But the singing never materialized, and instead, she found herself serving drinks and deflecting unwanted advances until the early hours of morning. Her mother had passed 6 months ago, leaving Natalie utterly alone in the world. Without that responsibility, she should have felt free, but instead she felt unmoored, drifting without purpose or direction. The other girls talked about finding rich husbands or saving enough money to open dress shops, but Natalie knew these were fairy tales they told themselves to make the nights bearable. The truth was that once you worked in a saloon, decent society closed its doors. Respectable men did not marry saloon girls, and respectable women crossed the street to avoid them. As Natalie delivered the prospector's drink, she noticed a man she had never seen before sitting alone at a corner table. He was different from the usual clientele, quieter and more watchful. His hat sat on the table beside him, revealing dark hair that touched his collar, and his clothes, though dusty from travel, were well made and carefully maintained. He nursed a single whiskey and seemed content to observe rather than participate in the raucous atmosphere around him. When his eyes met hers across the room, Natalie felt something shift in her chest, a small tremor that reminded her she was still capable of feeling something beyond resigned acceptance. She approached his table with her practiced smile. "Can I get you anything else?" He looked up at her with eyes the color of storm clouds, serious and direct. "Just the drink, thank you." His voice was low and polite, lacking the leering tone she had grown accustomed to. "Though I would not mind some conversation if you have a moment." Natalie glanced around the saloon. It was a busy night, but Floyd could manage for a few minutes. Something about this stranger made her want to linger, to step outside the routine just for a moment. She slid into the chair across from him, aware that this small act of sitting would be noted and probably commented on later. "I have a moment. Are you passing through town?" In a manner of speaking, he said. "I am Benjamin Edwards. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here. I came into town for supplies and to speak with the bank about expanding my operation." He took a sip of his whiskey, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "What is your name?" "Natalie," she said, and then, because he seemed genuinely interested, "Natalie Harper." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Harper." The formality of his address startled her. Most men in the saloon either called her by her first name with presumed familiarity or used crude nicknames. "Have you been in Chico long?" "6 years," she said, "though it feels like longer sometimes." Benjamin nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "I know that feeling. Time has a way of stretching out when you are waiting for something to change." Before Natalie could respond, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. She looked up to see Clarence Whitmore, his face red and sweating as usual. "Natalie, the customers need drinks, not conversation. Get back to work." She stood immediately, the spell broken. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore." She did not look back at Benjamin Edwards as she hurried away, but she could feel his eyes following her across the room. The rest of the night passed in a blur of drinks and demands. Natalie's feet ached in her thin dancing shoes, and her face hurt from maintaining her false smile. When the last customer finally stumbled out into the pre-dawn darkness, she helped the other girls clean up the worst of the mess before climbing the narrow stairs to the small room she rented above the saloon. It was barely larger than a closet, with space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing all her worldly possessions. She sat on the edge of the bed and carefully removed her shoes, wincing at the blisters that had formed on her heels. In the quiet of her room, Natalie allowed herself to think about Benjamin Edwards. There had been something different about him, something that made her remember the girl she had been before life had worn her down. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. He was a rancher with land and prospects, the kind of man who would marry a banker's daughter or a merchant's niece, not a saloon girl with a tarnished reputation. She had learned long ago not to entertain impossible dreams. The next day brought the usual routine. Natalie slept until noon, woke to wash in cold water from the basin, and dressed in her daytime clothes. A simple gray dress that marked her as something other than respectable but not quite scandalous. She walked to the general store to buy bread and cheese for her supper, keeping her eyes down as she passed groups of proper ladies in their afternoon dresses. She could hear their whispers, feel their judgment like a physical weight. As she was leaving the store, she nearly collided with someone on the wooden sidewalk. "I apologize," she said automatically, stepping back. "Miss Harper." Benjamin Edwards stood before her, a package under one arm. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was probably 28 or 29, with a strong jaw and weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. "I was hoping I might run into you." Natalie's heart beat faster, though she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Edwards, finished with your business in town?" "Nearly," he said. "I was wondering if I might speak with you. Perhaps we could take a walk." She should have said no. Every instinct told her that this man was dangerous, not because he would harm her physically, but because he made her want things she could not have. But the afternoon sun was warm, and she was so tired of her small room and the saloon's smoke-filled interior. "All right," she heard herself say. They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open fields and the Sacramento River wound its way through the valley. Benjamin did not try to take her arm or stand too close, respecting a boundary she had not known she needed. For several minutes, they walked in comfortable silence. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Harper," Benjamin finally said. "I have been looking for someone." Natalie's stomach dropped. Of course, he was looking for a lost sister or a runaway wife, and he thought she might have information. "I see. Not in the way you think," he said quickly, apparently reading the disappointment on her face. "I have been looking for someone to share my life with. Someone real, not some painted portrait in a parlor who would wilt at the first sign of hardship." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because last night, when I saw you in that saloon, I saw someone who was surviving despite her circumstances, not because of them. I saw strength and dignity in a place where most people would see only what they expect to see." Benjamin met her eyes steadily. "I know what you do for work, Miss Harper, and I do not care. What I care about is what kind of person you are, and everything I have observed tells me you are exactly the kind of person I have been searching for." Natalie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You do not know anything about me. You saw me serve drinks for a few hours. That hardly qualifies as understanding my character." "You are right," Benjamin said, "which is why I am asking if you would allow me to get to know you properly. I will be in town for another 3 days. Perhaps we could spend some time together, talk, see if there is something worth pursuing." "And if there is?" Natalie asked, afraid to hope. "What then? You will take the saloon girl home to your ranch and pretend she is something she is not." "I would take Natalie Harper to my ranch and introduce her as the woman I hope to build a life with," he corrected. "I am not asking you to pretend to be anything. I am asking if you want something different from what you have now." The question hung in the air between them. Did she want something different? The answer was so obvious it almost hurt. She had wanted something different from the moment she first tied on her saloon girl costume. She had wanted it every night when men looked at her like she was property to be purchased. She had wanted it every morning when she woke up alone and hopeless. But wanting and having were two very different things. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you offer this to me?" Benjamin's expression softened. "Because I am 30 years old, and I have spent the last 8 years building something worthwhile on land that was nothing but dust and determination when I started. I have a house, a herd, and good water. What I do not have is someone to share it with. I have attended church socials and barn dances. I have been introduced to every eligible woman within 50 miles. They are all nice enough, but when they look at my hands, I can see them thinking about how to change me, how to make me more refined. You looked at me last night like I was simply a man, not a project to be improved." Natalie considered his words. There was a directness to Benjamin Edwards that she found both unsettling and appealing. He said what he meant without games or manipulation. 3 days, she said finally. "I will spend time with you for 3 days, and then we will see." A smile transformed his serious face, making him look younger. 3 days is all I ask." They made arrangements to meet the following afternoon, after Natalie had recovered from another late night at the saloon. Benjamin walked her back to the edge of town, maintaining that respectful distance, before tipping his hat and heading toward the boarding house where he was staying. Natalie watched him go, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. That night at the Lucky Star, Natalie found it hard to concentrate on her work. She mixed up drink orders and forgot to smile at the right moments. The other girls noticed, particularly Sarah, a redhead who had been working there longer than anyone else. "You have got that look," Sarah said during a brief lull at the bar. "Like something happened. Did one of the customers bother you?" "No, nothing like that," Natalie assured her. She hesitated, then decided she needed to tell someone. "I met a man, a rancher. He asked to spend time with me." Sarah's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and finally settled on something like pity. "Oh, honey, be careful. These men always say they are different, that they do not care about the work you do, but when it comes down to it, they cannot handle what people will say." "Maybe," Natalie said, "but maybe not. Is it so impossible to think someone might see past all this?" She gestured at the saloon around them. "Not impossible," Sarah said softly. "Just unlikely. I do not want to see you get hurt, that is all." Natalie appreciated the concern, but she had already made her decision. For 3 days, she would allow herself to imagine a different life. If it led nowhere, at least she would have had that brief escape from the monotony of her existence. The next afternoon, Benjamin arrived at the agreed-upon spot with a borrowed buggy. "I thought we could drive out to the river," he said. "There is a place where the water pools that is quite beautiful this time of year." They drove out of town, past farms and ranches, until they reached a secluded bend in the river where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear and cool. Benjamin helped her down from the buggy, and they sat on a blanket he had brought, watching the water flow past. "Tell me about your ranch," Natalie said, genuinely curious. Benjamin's face lit up as he described his land. He had come west from Missouri 8 years ago with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his father. He had bought land that others considered worthless, too dry and too remote, but he had found water and worked tirelessly to build something sustainable. He raised cattle and horses, and had recently begun breeding draft horses that were in high demand with farmers in the valley. "It is not fancy," he admitted. "The house is simple, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it is solid and it sits on a rise where you can see for miles in every direction. In the evening when the sun sets, the whole valley turns gold." Natalie listened, painting the picture in her mind. She tried to imagine herself in that house on the rise, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. It seemed so far removed from her reality that it might as well have been on the moon. "What about you?" Benjamin asked. "What did you want to be before life intervened?" No one had ever asked her that question. Natalie thought back to her childhood, to the girl she had been before everything fell apart. "I wanted to teach," she said. "I loved learning, loved reading. My father was a school teacher back in Pennsylvania before he died. He taught me to love books and ideas. I used to imagine having my own classroom, helping children discover the world through words." "What happened?" Benjamin asked gently. Natalie took a deep breath. She had never told anyone the whole story, but something about this quiet place and this patient man made her want to share it. "My father died when I was 15. After that, my mother's brother came to live with us. He said he would help take care of us, but he had other ideas about how I could contribute to the household. When he started coming into my room at night, I told my mother. She did not believe me at first, but when she finally did, we left. We had nothing, just what we could carry. We ended up here because it was as far as our money would take us." Benjamin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "That took tremendous courage." "It took desperation," Natalie corrected. "My mother worked herself to death trying to support us. And I ended up in a saloon because no one would hire me for anything else. Some courage." "You survived," Benjamin said firmly. "You protected yourself and honored your mother's sacrifice by continuing to move forward. That is courage, Miss Harper, whether you recognize it or not." Tears pricked at Natalie's eyes. She had carried the weight of shame for so long that she had forgotten it was not hers to bear. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, of connection forming in the spaces between words. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about everything and nothing. Benjamin told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to work with horses from his father. Natalie shared memories of her father teaching her to read, of the rare moments of happiness in her current life, like watching the sunrise after a long night when the world felt new and full of possibility. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, Benjamin drove her back to town. "Tomorrow?" he asked as he helped her down from the buggy. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The second day, Benjamin took her to a small restaurant on the edge of town, a place where railroad workers and ranch hands ate hearty meals at rough tables. It was not fancy, but the food was good and plentiful. Over plates of fried chicken and potatoes, they continued their conversation from the day before. Natalie found herself laughing at Benjamin's stories about stubborn horses and the various disasters that had befallen him in his early days of ranching. "The first winter was the worst," he said, shaking his head at the memory. "I thought I knew what I was doing, but I had underestimated how cold it would get and how much feed I would need. I lost half my herd and I nearly lost the ranch. I had to swallow my pride and ask my neighbors for help. It turned out that was the best thing I could have done. The ranchers around here take care of their own once you prove you are willing to work." "Do you ever regret leaving Missouri?" Natalie asked. Benjamin considered the question. "Sometimes I miss my family, my sister especially. But no, I do not regret it. Back there, I would have ended up working my father's old farm, following in footsteps that did not quite fit. Here, I get to create something entirely my own." "That must be a wonderful feeling," Natalie said wistfully, "to have control over your own destiny." "You could have that too," Benjamin said. He reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had touched her beyond helping her in and out of the buggy. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "You could leave the saloon, start fresh." "And do what?" Natalie asked, though she did not pull her hand away. "I have no skills, no education beyond what my father taught me years ago. The only people who will hire me are people like Clarence Whitmore, who see me as one step above the girls who work in the cribs down by the railroad." "You could marry me," Benjamin said simply. Natalie's breath caught. "You cannot be serious. We have known each other for 2 days." "I am completely serious," Benjamin said. "I know it seems fast, but I am old enough to recognize something real when I see it. I want to build a life with someone who understands that life is not always easy or pretty, someone who has survived and still has the capacity to hope." "That is you, Natalie." She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to grab this lifeline and never let go. But years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious. "What if it does not work? What if you take me to your ranch and realize you made a mistake? What if I do not?" Benjamin countered. "What if this is exactly what both of us have been waiting for?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to decide right now. I am just asking you to consider the possibility." That night, Natalie could barely sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the saloon below gradually quiet as the last customers left and the girls finished cleaning. In the darkness, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. She pictured the house on the rise, the valley turning gold in the evening light. She imagined waking up next to Benjamin, working alongside him to build something that mattered. It was a beautiful dream, but she had been disappointed before. On the third day, Benjamin suggested they ride out to his ranch so she could see it for herself. He had brought an extra horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes. "Her name is Daisy," he said. "She is patient with nervous riders." "I have not ridden in years," Natalie admitted. "Not since I was a girl." "It will come back to you," Benjamin assured her. He helped her mount and they set off at an easy pace. The ride took them north out of Chico, through rolling hills dotted with oak trees. The April weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. As they rode, Benjamin pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. After about 2 hours, they crested a hill, and Natalie saw the ranch spread out below them. It was exactly as he had described it. The house sat on a rise, a simple wooden structure with a wide porch and a sturdy roof. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see horses in a corral near the barn. The land stretched out in every direction, golden grass waving in the breeze beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "What do you think?" Benjamin asked, watching her face carefully. "It is beautiful," Natalie said honestly. "I can see why you love it here." They rode down to the house, and Benjamin showed her around. The inside was neat but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture and practical items. The kitchen had a good stove and sturdy table. The main room had a fireplace and comfortable chairs. There were 2 bedrooms, one clearly Benjamin's and the other used for storage. "It is not much," Benjamin said, "but it could be more. I always planned to add on when I had a family." Natalie walked through the rooms, trailing her fingers along the rough wooden walls. She could see the potential here, the life that could be built within these walls. Through the window, she watched the valley below, exactly as Benjamin had promised, beginning to turn golden as the afternoon waned. "I am afraid," she admitted, turning to face him. "I am afraid that I will not be enough, that I will not know how to be what you need." Benjamin crossed the room to stand before her. "You are already enough, Natalie. I am not asking you to be anything other than yourself. Yes, ranch life is hard work, but we would face it together. I would teach you everything you need to know, and you would bring something to this place that it has been missing. You would bring life." "What will people say?" Natalie asked. "When they find out you married a saloon girl?" "Some will gossip," Benjamin acknowledged. "But the people whose opinions matter will judge you by your actions, not your past. My neighbors are good people. They will accept you because I do." Natalie looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw only sincerity. She thought about her alternatives. She could return to the Lucky Star, serving drinks and dodging groping hands until she was too old or too worn down to be useful anymore. She could try to find other work, though she knew how unlikely that was. Or she could take this chance, leap into the unknown with this man who offered her something she had thought impossible. "Yes," she said, the word barely above a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin's face split into a wide smile. He took her hands in his, squeezing gently. "You will not regret this, Natalie. I promise you that." They rode back to Chico as the sun set, planning as they traveled. Benjamin wanted to marry as soon as possible. There was a circuit preacher due in town in 2 days who could perform the ceremony. Natalie would need to quit her job at the Lucky Star and gather her few belongings. It was all happening so fast, but that felt right somehow. If she stopped to think too hard, she might talk herself out of it. When they reached town, Benjamin insisted on walking her directly to the saloon. At the door, he took both her hands again. "I will be back tomorrow morning to take you to the church. We can arrange everything with the preacher then." Natalie nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that was happening. "Benjamin, are you sure about this?" "I have never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. Then, for the first time, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Sleep well, Natalie. Tomorrow, your new life begins." Inside the Lucky Star, Natalie found Clarence Whitmore counting the receipts at the bar. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to speak with you." He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Natalie? We open in an hour and I need you ready to work." "I am quitting," she said, the words coming out stronger than she had expected. "I will work tonight to give you time to find someone else, but then I am leaving." Clarence's face darkened. "Quitting? You cannot just quit. You owe me for room and board." "I have paid for my room every week," Natalie said. "I owe you nothing except the courtesy of notice, which I am giving you now." "You are making a mistake," Clarence said. "Girls like you do not have options. You think some man is going to take care of you. He will use you and throw you away, and then where will you be?" "That is my risk to take," Natalie said. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. That final night at the Lucky Star passed in a haze. Natalie performed her duties mechanically, her mind already far away from the smoke and noise. Sarah pulled her aside during a quiet moment. "So you are really doing this?" "I am," Natalie confirmed. "I hope he is worth it," Sarah said. "I really do. You deserve something good, Nat." When the night finally ended, Natalie packed her few belongings into her trunk. She had so little to show for her 23 years, but that would change now. Everything would change. Benjamin arrived at mid-morning the next day, driving a wagon this time. He helped Natalie load her trunk and walked with her to see the circuit preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Matthews, who agreed to perform the ceremony the following afternoon. They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Benjamin bought Natalie a simple dress from the general store, a soft blue cotton that fit her perfectly. They purchased supplies for the ranch and made arrangements for Natalie's room at the boarding house for one night, as Benjamin felt it would be more proper than her staying above the saloon. That evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch, Natalie felt the weight of her decision settling over her. "Tell me about your neighbors," she said. "The people I will be meeting." Benjamin described the other ranchers in the area. There was Tom and Martha Dixon, who ran cattle on the property adjacent to his. They had 3 children and had been in the area for 15 years. To the west were the Callahan brothers, 2 bachelors who raised horses. North of his property was land owned by a widow named Ruth Peterson, who managed her late husband's ranch with the help of a foreman. "Ruth is formidable," Benjamin said with obvious respect. "When her husband died 5 years ago, everyone assumed she would sell and move back east. Instead, she learned the business and now runs one of the most successful operations in the valley. I think you will like her." "I hope they will like me," Natalie said. "They will," Benjamin assured her. "Martha Dixon is always complaining about being the only woman around. She will be thrilled to have another woman nearby." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Natalie woke early in her boarding house room, anxiety and excitement warring in her chest. She bathed carefully and dressed in her new blue dress. She had no jewelry or finery, but she pinned her dark hair up carefully and pinched her cheeks for color. Benjamin met her at the church, a small wooden building at the edge of town. He wore a clean shirt and his best vest, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her feel beautiful despite her simple appearance. There were no guests at the ceremony. Reverend Matthews performed a brief service, reading from his worn Bible about love and commitment. When he asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Natalie's voice shook only slightly as she said, "I do." Benjamin's voice was strong and sure. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said. "You may kiss your bride." Benjamin leaned in and kissed Natalie softly, a promise of things to come. It was her first real kiss, and she felt it all the way to her toes. They signed the marriage certificate, making it official. Natalie Harper was now Natalie Edwards, a name that felt foreign and wonderful on her tongue. As they walked out of the church, Benjamin took her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Edwards, home." The word resonated in Natalie's chest. She had not had a real home since her father died. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." The ride to the ranch took most of the afternoon. Benjamin drove the wagon loaded with supplies and Natalie's trunk, while Daisy, the gentle mare, was tethered behind. Natalie sat beside her new husband, watching the landscape change as they left town behind. The further they traveled from Chico, the lighter she felt, as if she was shedding the weight of her past with every mile. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Benjamin helped Natalie down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, scooped her up in his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a slight smile, carrying her across the threshold of the house. Inside, everything was as she remembered from her previous visit, but now it felt different. This was her home now, her space to shape and fill. Benjamin set her down gently and gestured around the main room. "I know it is not much, but we can make it better together." "It is perfect," Natalie said, and she meant it. They spent the rest of the evening unloading the wagon and settling Natalie's belongings into the house. Benjamin had cleared out the storage room to make it into a proper bedroom for them, with a large bed he had built himself and a chest of drawers for their clothes. As darkness fell, Benjamin cooked a simple dinner of beans and bread, apologizing for his limited culinary skills. "I will learn to cook properly," Natalie promised. "I know the basics, but I want to make good meals for us." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the stars emerged overhead. The night was quiet except for the sounds of cattle in the distance and the wind moving through the grass. Natalie had never experienced such profound silence. In town, there was always noise, always activity. Here, the peace felt almost sacred. "Are you nervous?" Benjamin asked softly. Natalie considered the question. She was nervous, but not in the way he probably meant. "I am nervous about failing you, about not being able to do everything that needs to be done here." "You will not fail," Benjamin said. He reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Ranching is hard work and there will be difficult days, but we will face them together. That is what marriage means." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer before Benjamin stood and offered his hand. "It has been a long day. We should rest." In the bedroom, Natalie changed into the nightgown she had purchased in town, her hands trembling slightly. When she emerged, Benjamin was already in bed, the lamp turned low. She climbed in beside him, and he immediately pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for trusting me." Natalie relaxed against him, feeling safe for the first time in years. "Thank you for seeing me." Their wedding night was tender and gentle. Benjamin took his time, making sure Natalie felt comfortable and cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Natalie felt tears slide down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. She had been so certain that her life would follow a predictable, bleak trajectory. Benjamin had offered her an escape, yes, but more than that, he had offered her hope. The next morning, Natalie woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and found Benjamin in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "I am not very good at this," he admitted, gesturing at the slightly burnt eggs. Natalie laughed and gently pushed him aside. "Let me try." Together they salvaged breakfast and ate at the small kitchen table. Afterward, Benjamin took her outside to show her around the ranch properly. He introduced her to the horses, including a beautiful chestnut gelding named Copper and a pair of draft horses he was training. In the barn, he showed her where he kept the tack and tools, explaining the routine of feeding and caring for the animals. "The cattle mostly take care of themselves this time of year," he explained. "But the horses need daily attention. I have a young ranch hand, Danny, who comes 3 times a week to help with the heavy work. He is a good kid, 16 years old and eager to learn." They walked out to the pastures, and Benjamin pointed out the property boundaries and the water sources that made his land so valuable. "The creek that runs through the eastern section never dries up, even in the worst summers. That is what convinced me to buy this place." As they walked, Natalie asked questions about everything. How many cattle did he have? What did he do in the winter? How did he decide which horses to breed? Benjamin answered patiently, clearly pleased by her interest. By the time they returned to the house, Natalie's head was spinning with information, but she felt energized rather than overwhelmed. Over the next few weeks, Natalie threw herself into learning her new life. She practiced cooking on the wood stove, burning more than one meal before she got the hang of controlling the temperature. She learned to tend the vegetable garden that Benjamin had started but never properly maintained. She discovered that she enjoyed the physical work, the way her body grew stronger as she hauled water and hung laundry and swept floors. Benjamin was patient and encouraging, never criticizing when she made mistakes. When she accidentally left the gate open and two horses got out, he simply helped her round them up and showed her how to secure the latch properly. When she ruined an entire batch of bread by using too much salt, he ate it anyway, claiming it was not that bad even as he reached for his water glass repeatedly. Their relationship deepened in those early weeks. They talked constantly, sharing stories and dreams and observations. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the valley. Benjamin taught Natalie to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to accompany him when he rode out to check on the cattle. At night, they learned each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and comfort. About a month after their wedding, Benjamin announced that the Dixons had invited them to dinner. "Martha has been pestering me to bring you over," he said. "I think she is desperate for female company." Natalie felt a flutter of anxiety. This would be her first time meeting any of Benjamin's neighbors, the people who would form the core of her new social circle. "What if they do not like me?" "They will love you," Benjamin said firmly. "Just be yourself." The Dixon Ranch was about 5 miles from Benjamin's property. As they rode up to the house, Natalie saw a woman emerge onto the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Martha Dixon was a sturdy woman in her mid-30s, with graying blonde hair and a wide, welcoming smile. "You must be Natalie," she called out before they had even dismounted. "Ben has been keeping you all to himself, and I was beginning to think he had made you up." Natalie found herself enveloped in a warm hug before she could respond. Martha smelled like bread and laundry soap, comforting and motherly. "It is so wonderful to meet you," Natalie said. Tom Dixon appeared from the barn, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He shook Benjamin's hand and nodded politely to Natalie. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mrs. Edwards." The dinner was a lively affair. The Dixon children, ranging in age from 6 to 14, peppered Natalie with questions between mouthfuls of Martha's excellent stew. Where was she from? Did she like horses? Had she ever seen a bear? Natalie answered as best she could, charmed by their enthusiasm. After dinner, while the men discussed cattle prices and water rights, Martha pulled Natalie aside. "I want to apologize in advance," she said. "I know people will gossip. Small communities are like that. But I want you to know that Tom and I do not care one bit about where you came from. What matters is that you make Ben happy, and I can already see that you do." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Ben is a good man," Martha continued. "He came out here with nothing and built something real through sheer determination. He deserves a good woman, and I think he found one." The evening ended with promises to get together again soon. As Benjamin and Natalie rode home under the stars, Natalie felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the mild evening. She had been accepted, embraced even without judgment or qualification. Spring turned to summer, and Natalie settled more deeply into her new life. She met the other neighbors, including Ruth Peterson, the formidable widow who ran her ranch with an iron will. Ruth took an immediate liking to Natalie, recognizing a kindred spirit who had survived difficult circumstances through sheer determination. Do not let anyone make you feel less than, Ruth advised during one of her visits. I have heard the whispers about where you came from. People will always find something to gossip about. The only thing that matters is how you conduct yourself now. Natalie took the advice to heart. She worked hard, contributed to the community, and held her head high when she went to town for supplies. Some people were cold to her, crossing the street to avoid speaking, but more were kind, judging her by her current actions rather than her past. In June, Benjamin announced that it was time to drive some of his horses to Sacramento to sell. It is a 3-day trip each way, he said. I will need to be gone for about a week. Will you be all right here alone? Natalie assured him she would be fine. She had Danny, the young ranch hand, checking in regularly, and Martha had already offered to stop by every day. The thought of being alone was both frightening and exciting. It would be her first real test, managing the ranch by herself. The morning Benjamin left, he kissed her goodbye with obvious reluctance. If anything goes wrong, send Danny to the Dixons. Tom will come help. I will be fine, Natalie assured him. Go sell those horses for a good price. The first few days passed smoothly. Natalie fell into a routine of feeding the animals, tending the garden, and maintaining the house. She cooked simple meals for herself and enjoyed the quiet evenings reading by lamplight. Benjamin had a small collection of books, and she had been slowly working her way through them. On the 4th day, trouble arrived in the form of a late afternoon thunderstorm. Natalie had been in town getting supplies when the sky darkened ominously. She hurried home, but the storm broke before she reached the ranch. Rain poured down in sheets, and lightning split the sky with terrifying frequency. She got the horses into the barn and the chickens into their coop, then ran for the house, soaked to the skin. Inside, she changed into dry clothes and tried to calm her racing heart. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the corners of the house. She lit lamps and tried to read, but she found herself checking the windows constantly, worried about the animals. Around midnight, she heard a crash from the barn. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern and ran outside, heedless of the rain. In the barn, she found that the wind had torn a board loose, and it was banging against the wall, terrifying the horses. Copper was rearing in his stall, eyes rolling white with fear. Natalie approached slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice the way Benjamin had taught her. "Easy, boy. It is just the storm. You are safe." It took several minutes, but eventually Copper settled enough for her to secure the loose board with some rope. She checked on all the other animals, making sure everyone was secure before finally returning to the house, exhausted and soaked again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Natalie surveyed the damage. Besides the loose board in the barn, several shingles had blown off the chicken coop, and the garden had taken a beating. She spent the day making repairs as best she could, grateful for all the skills Benjamin had taught her. When Benjamin returned 2 days later, she was in the garden, replanting vegetables that had been uprooted by the storm. He dismounted quickly and strode toward her, his face concerned. "Martha told me about the storm. Are you all right?" Natalie stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I am fine. There was some damage, but I managed to fix most of it." Benjamin looked around, taking in the repaired chicken coop and the freshly worked garden. "You did all this yourself?" "Danny helped with the chicken coop," Natalie admitted. "But yes, mostly myself." Benjamin pulled her into a tight embrace, not seeming to care that she was covered in dirt. "I am so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "You are stronger than you know." That night, as they lay in bed, Benjamin told her about his trip. The horses had sold well, bringing in more money than he had expected. "We can afford to expand the herd now," he said excitedly. And I want to add on to the house, build a proper parlor and maybe another bedroom." "Another bedroom?" Natalie asked. Benjamin rolled onto his side to face her, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "For when we have children, I mean if you want children, we have never really discussed it." Natalie's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She had been wondering for a few weeks if she might be pregnant. Her courses were late and she had been feeling queasy in the mornings. "I think we might need that bedroom sooner than you expect," she said softly. Benjamin's eyes widened. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am not certain yet," Natalie admitted, "but I think so. I think I might be carrying our child." The joy that spread across Benjamin's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He kissed her deeply, then pulled back to look at her with wonder. "A baby! We are going to have a baby! Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Benjamin said. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Natalie. A home, a partnership, and now a family." The next few months passed in a happy blur. Natalie's pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Chico, who pronounced her healthy and told her to expect the baby in February. Martha Dixon immediately took Natalie under her wing, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from her own children. Ruth Peterson stopped by regularly, bringing gifts and sharing stories from when she had been pregnant with her own son, now grown and living in San Francisco. Benjamin became almost comically protective. He insisted Natalie rest more and do less heavy work. When she protested that she was pregnant, not dying, he compromised by hiring Danny for more hours to help with the chores. He also threw himself into the house expansion project, determined to have the new rooms finished before the baby arrived. By October, the new parlor and bedroom were complete. Natalie had sewn curtains and made a quilt for the baby's cradle, which Benjamin had crafted himself from oak. The house felt like a real home now, filled with love and anticipation. As winter approached, Natalie found herself reflecting on the past year. She had gone from a hopeless saloon girl to a rancher's wife expecting her first child. It seemed impossible, like something out of a fairy tale. But it was real, built on hard work and genuine love. In late January, a heavy snow fell, unusual for the valley but not unheard of. Natalie woke early one morning to the hushed silence that comes with fresh snowfall. She stood at the window, watching the world transform into something pristine and new, and felt a deep contentment settle over her. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked from the bed, his voice still rough with sleep. "How different everything is from a year ago," Natalie said. "How much has changed?" Benjamin came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her expanded waist. "Better or worse?" "So much better," Natalie said. "Sometimes I worry I will wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Benjamin assured her. "This is real and it is ours, and it is just beginning." 2 weeks later, on a cold February night, Natalie went into labor. Benjamin rode through the darkness to fetch Martha, who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Benjamin paced in the main room, feeling helpless as he listened to Natalie's cries of pain. Just after dawn, a baby's wail split the air. Martha emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy," and Natalie did wonderfully. Benjamin rushed into the bedroom to find Natalie propped up against pillows, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. She looked exhausted but radiant. "Meet your son," she said softly. Benjamin approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and perfect. The baby had dark hair like both of them and a serious expression that reminded him of his father. "He is beautiful," Benjamin whispered. What should we name him? They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at her son's face, Natalie knew. Jacob, she said. After my father. Jacob Edwards. Jacob, Benjamin repeated, testing the name. It is perfect. The first months of Jacob's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Natalie had read books about caring for infants, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of sleepless nights and constant feeding. Benjamin helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Jacob when he fussed and bringing Natalie meals when she was too tired to cook. Spring came again, and with it, new life on the ranch. The cattle dropped their calves and several of the horses foaled. Natalie spent hours watching Jacob watch the world, his dark eyes taking in everything with intense concentration. She sang to him, the songs her father had sung to her, and told him stories about the grandfather he would never meet. As the months passed, Jacob grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, cheerful baby who laughed at everything his father did. Benjamin was completely smitten, spending every spare moment with his son. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch as a family, Jacob on Natalie's lap, watching the sun paint the valley gold. One evening in early summer, Martha and Tom stopped by for a visit. As the women sat on the porch watching Jacob play with wooden blocks Benjamin had carved, Martha said, "You have built something good here, Natalie. I know it was not easy starting over the way you did, but you have made a real home." Natalie looked around at the house, at the land stretching out around them, at her husband playing with their son. "I did not build it alone," she said. "Benjamin gave me a chance when no one else would. He saw me when I was invisible." "That is what real love does," Martha said wisely. "It sees the truth of a person, not the surface." As Jacob's first birthday approached, Benjamin and Natalie hosted a party at the ranch. The Dixons came, along with Ruth Peterson and the Callahan brothers. Even Danny, now 17 and still working regularly at the ranch, attended with his family. They ate cake and watched Jacob demolish his piece with enthusiastic messiness. That night, after everyone had gone home and Jacob was asleep in his cradle, Benjamin and Natalie sat on their porch as they had countless times before. "I have been thinking," Benjamin said, "about how we met, about that night in the Lucky Star." "What about it?" Natalie asked. "I was not supposed to be there that night," Benjamin said. "I usually stay at the boarding house when I am in town. But it was full, and someone suggested I get a drink at the Lucky Star while I waited for a room to open up. If I had gone anywhere else, if the timing had been even slightly different, I never would have met you." "Fate," Natalie said softly. "Maybe," Benjamin agreed. "Or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful for it every single day." Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, you know. I was drowning, and I did not even realize it until you threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," Benjamin corrected. "I was building something out here, but it was not a life. It was just work. You made it a life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Inside, Jacob made small sleeping noises, and Natalie felt her heart swell with love for her small family. She thought about the girl she had been, serving drinks in a smoky saloon and believing she had no future. That girl would never have imagined this life, this happiness. Time continued its steady march. Jacob learned to walk, then to run, keeping Natalie constantly on her toes. He was a fearless child, curious about everything. Benjamin taught him to feed the chickens and to gentle the horses with patient hands. By the time he was 3, Jacob could sit a horse better than many adults. In the fall of 1885, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Benjamin was thrilled. though he joked that he would need to build yet another bedroom. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the spring of 1886. She was tiny and delicate, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's serious expression. Jacob was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. Natalie often found him singing to Rose, the same songs she had sung to him. The ranch continued to prosper. Benjamin's reputation for quality horses spread throughout the valley and beyond. He hired additional help, including a full-time ranch hand named Miguel who had worked on ranches all his life. With the extra help, Benjamin was able to spend more time with his family, teaching Jacob the skills he would need to eventually run the ranch himself. Natalie blossomed in her role as wife and mother. The scared, hopeless saloon girl was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her worth. She became known in the community for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. When Ruth Peterson fell ill one winter, Natalie was one of the first to arrive with food and medicine. When Martha's youngest broke his arm, Natalie took the other Dixon children for a week so Martha could focus on caring for the injured boy. The years passed in a pattern of seasons and celebrations. There were hard times, certainly. A drought in 1887 tested everyone in the valley, and they lost some cattle to the heat. A harsh winter in 1889 brought more snow than anyone could remember. But they weathered each challenge together, the community pulling together to help one another survive. In 1890, when Jacob was 5 and Rose was 4, Natalie became pregnant for the third time. This baby, another boy they named Samuel, arrived easily and quickly, as if he could not wait to join the family. With 3 children, the ranch house was constantly filled with noise and laughter, and the chaos of family life. Benjamin proved to be a devoted father. He spent hours teaching his children to read and do arithmetic, passing on the love of learning he had inherited from his own father. In the evenings, the family would gather around the fireplace, and Benjamin would tell stories while Natalie mended clothes or nursed Samuel. One evening, as they sat in their usual places, Jacob asked, "Papa, how did you and Mama meet?" Natalie and Benjamin exchanged glances. They had known this question would come eventually, but they had not quite decided how to answer it. Benjamin cleared his throat. "Your mother was working in a saloon when I met her," he said carefully. "She served drinks to miners and ranch hands. I saw her and knew immediately that she was special." "What is a saloon?" Rose asked. "A place where people go to drink and socialize," Natalie said. "It was not a bad place to work exactly, but it was not where I wanted to spend my life. Your father offered me a different choice." "He rescued you," Jacob said, his eyes shining with the romance of it. "In a way," Natalie agreed, "but I also rescued myself. I made the choice to leave to start over. Your father made that choice possible, but I had to be brave enough to take it." "You are the bravest person I know," Benjamin said quietly, his eyes meeting Natalie's across the room. As the children grew older, they learned the truth about their mother's past in pieces. The community had not forgotten where Natalie came from, and there were always those willing to whisper and judge. But the Edwards children learned early that their mother's worth was not defined by where she had been, but by who she had become. In 1895, when they had been married for 13 years, Benjamin took Natalie back to Chico for the first time since their wedding. They left the children with Martha and rode into town together, Natalie's heart pounding as they approached the familiar streets. The Lucky Star Saloon was still there, though it looked more run down than Natalie remembered. Clarence Whitmore was dead, she learned, and a new owner ran the establishment. Some of the old saloon girls were still there, including Sarah, who looked worn and tired beyond her years. When Sarah saw Natalie, her face lit up. "I heard you married a rancher," she said. "I hoped it worked out." "It did," Natalie said. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They talked for a while, Natalie learning about what had happened to the other girls over the years. Some had married, some had moved on to other towns, and some, like Sarah, were still there, trapped by circumstance and lack of options. When it was time to leave, Natalie pressed some money into Sarah's hand. "For when you are ready to make a change," she said. Sarah looked at the bills, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you for remembering us." As Benjamin and Natalie rode out of town, Natalie felt a sense of closure. That part of her life was truly over, relegated to memory. She had moved forward, built something real, and become the person she was always meant to be. The turn of the century brought changes to the valley. The railroad expanded, making it easier to transport cattle and horses to distant markets. More settlers arrived, and Chico continued to grow. The Edwards Ranch prospered along with the region. Benjamin and Miguel expanded the operation, breeding increasingly sought-after horses that were sold as far away as Oregon and Nevada. Jacob, now 15, was already an accomplished horseman and a capable ranch hand. He had inherited his father's patient way with animals and his mother's quick mind. Rose, at 14, was becoming a skilled rider and loved working with the horses as much as her brother did. Samuel, at 10, was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about the world beyond the ranch. In 1901, Jacob announced his intention to court Emma Dixon, Martha and Tom's youngest daughter. She was a sensible girl with a kind heart, and both families approved. Watching her son begin, the courtship process made Natalie acutely aware of how much time had passed. She was 42 now, with threads of silver in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the sun. Benjamin was 51, his hair more gray than dark, but still strong and vital. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset they had watched together countless times, Benjamin took Natalie's hand. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Natalie considered the question seriously. She thought about the road not taken, about what her life might have been if she had never met Benjamin Edwards. "None," she said finally. "This life with you is more than I ever dared to dream. You gave me not just a home, but a purpose. You gave me a family and a future." "You gave me the same," Benjamin said. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "That night in the Lucky Star, I saw a woman who had survived when survival seemed impossible. I saw strength and grace under impossible circumstances. I knew then that I wanted to spend my life with you. And now?" Natalie asked. "Now that you know all of me, the good and the bad, now I love you even more," Benjamin said simply. "Every year we have been together has only made me more certain that you were the right choice, the only choice." They watched the valley turn gold in the fading light, just as Benjamin had promised all those years ago. The land stretched out before them, marked by their labor and their love. 3 children slept safely in the house behind them, the product of their union and their hopes. The ranch hummed with life and purpose. In 1903, Jacob married Emma in a ceremony at the Dixon Ranch. The whole community turned out to celebrate, and Natalie found herself surrounded by people who had become like family over the years. As she watched her son dance with his new bride, she felt Benjamin's arm slip around her waist. "Our son is a man now," Benjamin murmured. "It happened so fast." "It did," Natalie agreed, "but we raised him well. He will build a good life with Emma." Jacob and Emma built a small house on the far edge of the Edwards property, and Jacob took on more responsibility for running the ranch. Benjamin was happy to step back slightly, spending more time teaching Samuel and enjoying his daughter's company. Rose had decided she wanted to become a teacher, following in the footsteps of the grandfather she had never met. She studied diligently and eventually passed the examination to qualify for a teaching position. In 1905, Jacob and Emma welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Natalie. When Emma placed the baby in Natalie's arms for the first time, Natalie felt a completeness she had not known she was missing. She was a grandmother now, the matriarch of a growing family. The scared saloon girl from Chico seemed like a character from a story, not her own past. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Benjamin's health remained strong, though he moved a bit slower and his joints ached in cold weather. Natalie developed a reputation as a midwife, helping to deliver babies throughout the valley. She found satisfaction in easing other women through the pain and fear of childbirth, remembering her own difficult experiences. In 1910, Samuel announced he wanted to attend university in San Francisco to study engineering. It was a difficult decision for the family. They had always assumed Samuel would stay and work the ranch with his brother. But Natalie, remembering her own father's love of learning, encouraged Samuel to pursue his dreams. "The world is changing," she told Benjamin. "Our children should be part of that change, not held back by our expectations." Benjamin reluctantly agreed, and Samuel left for San Francisco in the fall. The house felt empty without his questions and his laughter. But his letters came regularly, full of enthusiasm for his studies and descriptions of city life that both fascinated and alarmed his parents. Rose married a young lawyer named David Harrison in 1912. He was a good man who supported Rose's desire to continue teaching even after they were married. They settled in Chico, and Natalie visited them regularly, marveling at how the town had grown and changed since her days at the Lucky Star. By 1915, Benjamin and Natalie had been married for 33 years. Jacob now ran most of the ranch operations, with Benjamin serving as advisor and consultant. They had 5 grandchildren, with another on the way. The Edwards Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the valley. One evening, as they sat on their porch in the familiar rhythm of decades, Natalie said, "Do you remember what you said to me that day by the river, when you asked me to spend 3 days getting to know you?" "Every word," Benjamin said. "I told you I had been looking for someone to share my life with, someone who understood that life was not always easy or pretty." "You found that person," Natalie said, "and I found everything I never knew I needed: a home, a family, a purpose. You." Benjamin took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "I have been thinking about mortality lately," he admitted. "I am 65 now, and I cannot pretend I will live forever, but whatever time I have left, I want to spend it exactly like this. With you, watching the sun set over our land, surrounded by the family we built together." "That is all any of us can ask for," Natalie said. "A life well lived, filled with love and purpose." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead. The night sounds of the ranch, so familiar they were like background music, surrounded them. Inside the house, they could hear Jacob and Emma talking, their voices carrying through the open windows. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate saloon girl with no future to a wife, mother, grandmother, and respected member of the community. It had not been an easy path, but it had been her path, and she would not change a single step. Benjamin squeezed her hand gently. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Natalie said. "And nothing, just feeling grateful." "For what?" "For you, for all of this, for the life you offered me when I had given up hope. You told me once that I brought life to this place, but you did the same for me. You saw me when I was invisible. You offered your hand and a new beginning when I thought such things were impossible." "We were both lucky," Benjamin said, "to find each other in that crowded saloon. To recognize something real in the midst of all that noise and smoke." "The luckiest," Natalie agreed. As the years continued to pass, Benjamin's health gradually declined. He developed a cough that would not go away, and his energy waned. But he remained sharp and engaged, delighting in his growing number of grandchildren and taking pride in the ranch's continued success. In the spring of 1920, Benjamin passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 70 years old and had lived to see his great-grandchildren born. Natalie, at 61, found herself a widow after 38 years of marriage. The grief was overwhelming at first, a physical ache that made it hard to breathe. The community rallied around her. Martha, now elderly herself, came to sit with Natalie during those first terrible days. Jacob and Emma moved into the main house so she would not be alone. Rose visited constantly, and even Samuel came home from San Francisco for an extended stay. At Benjamin's funeral, Natalie stood before the assembled community and spoke about the man she had loved. "Benjamin Edwards was a man of few words and many actions," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He believed in hard work and honest dealing. He believed in giving people second chances, in seeing past surface appearances to the truth underneath. He offered me such a chance once, and it changed the course of my life. He was a good husband, a devoted father, a proud grandfather, and a loyal friend. The world is diminished by his loss." After Benjamin's death, Natalie found herself at a crossroads. She could move to town, live quietly near Rose, or she could stay on the ranch with Jacob's family. In the end, there was no real choice. This land, this house, held every memory of her life with Benjamin. She could not leave it any more than she could stop breathing. She remained in the main house, though she gave Jacob and Emma the master bedroom, moving her things into the small room that had once been Rose's. She kept herself busy helping Emma with the grandchildren and maintaining the large garden that now provided vegetables for multiple families. She continued her work as a midwife, finding solace in helping new life enter the world. The grief softened with time, though it never disappeared completely. Natalie learned to live with the Benjamin-shaped hole in her life, filling it with family and purpose. She told stories about him to the grandchildren, making sure they understood what kind of man their grandfather had been. In 1925, on what would have been their 43rd anniversary, Natalie made a pilgrimage to Chico. She had not been back to town in years, and she was curious to see what had become of the Lucky Star Saloon. The building was still there, but it had been converted into a general store. The new owners had no idea what the building had once been. Natalie stood on the sidewalk, looking at the transformed space, and felt a sense of completion. That chapter of her life was truly closed now, the building itself repurposed for something more wholesome. She thought about the girl she had been, trapped and hopeless, and wished she could tell that girl what the future held. That cowboy in the corner would offer his hand, and she would be brave enough to take it. That together, they would build something beautiful out of dust and determination. She lived on for another decade, surrounded by a growing family. By the time she died peacefully in her sleep in 1935 at the age of 76, she had 7 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. The Edwards Ranch was a thriving operation, respected throughout the state. Her children had all built successful lives, and her legacy extended far beyond the physical property. At her funeral, Rose read from a journal Natalie had kept in her later years. "I was a saloon girl who wanted a different life," Rose read, her voice thick with emotion. "A cowboy offered his hand in a new beginning. I took that hand and it led me to everything good in my life. To love, to family, to purpose and belonging. I was lost and I was found. I was nobody and I became somebody. Not because of what my husband gave me, but because he helped me find what was already inside me. The strength, the courage, the capacity for love. He saw it when I could not, and he waited patiently while I learned to see it too. I have lived a good life, far better than I ever imagined possible. And it all started with one man's kindness and one woman's courage to accept it. The family buried Natalie next to Benjamin on the rise overlooking the valley, where they had sat together so many evenings watching the sun paint the world gold. A simple marker bore their names and dates, with an inscription that Jacob had chosen. Together they built a legacy of love. The Edwards Ranch continued to operate for generations, passed down through Jacob's line. The story of Benjamin and Natalie became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The saloon girl and the cowboy who had seen past her circumstances to the person beneath. The love story that had started in an unlikely place and blossomed into something that transcended time. In the end, Natalie's life stood as testament to the power of second chances and the transformative nature of true love. She had wanted a different life, and a cowboy had offered his hand. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy built on trust, respect, and the deep knowledge that love could redeem and transform even the most hopeless situation. Their story was one of courage and hope, proof that endings could become beginnings, and that the most unlikely meetings could lead to the most beautiful outcomes.